Do not pray for easy lives. Pray to be stronger men. Do not pray for tasks equal to your powers. Pray for powers equal to your tasks. Phillip Brooks. Hello and welcome to the second episode of the GapFillers podcast. My name is Michael Bradford. There's a lot of news to get to, from fires in California to Jimmy Carter's funeral and Obama and Donald Trump making jokes at each other. But first, I want to welcome you all back, and if this is something that you would like to follow more of, be sure to follow me on Spotify, and let's get to it. Let's go back to let's get to something some local news first that has really been a frustration of mine for a little bit, and it's the annexation of Sunbridge and part of the Mormon Ranch, Deseret, and into the city of Orlando. And in doing some research, I have found out in October the county and Orlando had come to an agreement. Basically, Orlando was able to squeeze Orange County out of a few funds in order to prevent them from annexing Deseret, which would have made Orlando just pretty much all of Orange County. It would have annexed 52,000 acres of Mormon Ranch, including the 6,000 acres that they agreed to for Sunbridge. So as of right now, they're not annexing the Mormon Ranch, and they're only annexing 6,000 acres of the Sunbridge, which is in East Orlando. It's basically runs parallel to Narcoossee, if you all are familiar with the area, and if that is just one area that's blown up over the past 20 years, maybe even just 10 years. I remember my parents would always be able to be or my dad specifically, because he grew up in Orlando. I remember when all this was orange groves. Well, Lake Nona is one of those places in Narcoossee. I remember when I was 5, all this was orange groves. There was not a thing around. There was one small golf course, one golf community out there, and between 417 and St. Cloud. Now it's pretty much all just strip malls and an suburban nightmare. And they're planning on doing that with the Sunbridge annexation. This is being put forth by the Tavistock Corporation, which is the developer that is basically allowing and enticing annexation from the city of Orlando, which will give them fire departments and stuff like that to start out, so they can start building out there, which will add let's see, my notes say 5,000 up to 5,000 new single-family homes, and another 1,000 on top of that of multi-family homes, like complexes, like condo complexes and stuff like that. So what this is going to do is going to put even more pressure on Narcoossee, that is just pretty much just garbage infrastructure right now. Just absolutely, just traffic. It takes an hour to get from one end to the other, where it would have only taken about 10 minutes, only 10 years ago. So, not only that, but in annexing this property, it would also enlarge the Orlando urban sprawl towards the St. Johns River, which, if you know me, I'm not a rabid environmentalist. However, I love East Orlando. I love rural areas, and I don't like telling people what they can and can't do with their own property. But when it comes down to the St. Johns River, it's a vital waterway that runs over half of all of Florida. So runoff from fertilizer and golf courses that kind of go along with the suburban, like Avalon or, Wedgefield is a little bit like that. But Wedgefield is kind of like a rural-ish area out in the middle of halfway between Titusville and Orlando. But it doesn't, it has a minimal impact on the landscape. Whereas if it was a true suburban area, single family homes, cookie cutter, back to back to back, everybody fertilizing their lawn, putting nitrates and phosphate in the ground, and this would potentially cause something that we in Florida have had for a while, these red tides, bloom, these algae blooms that pop up from. A lot of it has been done in South Florida with the runoff from the sugar industry down there toward closer to the Everglades, but we've had it on our coast in Central Florida, on both ends, and this oftentimes comes from warm weather is a prerequisite, but a lot of the golf course runoff and people fertilizing their yards close to waterways gets into that waterway and causes a algae bloom. And when these algae die, the bacteria that eats them basically consumes all the oxygen. So let me take a step back. When algae produces oxygen when it grows, right? And it has daylight, so it does what every other plant does with photosynthesis. It combines nutrients with CO2 and creates and releases oxygen and stores the glucose. However, when at nighttime or under stress circumstances, or just in daily use, the algae will then use the glucose and then use the oxygen in the water, and that's basically how it suffocates the fish. Not only that, but when these algae die, algae doesn't have a extremely long lifespan. Individual cyanobacteria that is what algae is. When it settles down to the bottom of the river or the body of water, other bacteria eats it and release toxins, and that's what actually causes the death of the fish, between the lacking of oxygen, deoxygenization, of the water, and the increase in toxins in the water, and that can actually make humans sick too, and that's why you shouldn't go swimming with red tide. Anyways, all that to say is the St. John's waterway is extremely volatile or fragile, and not only that, but this is something of what is actually happening with the Everglades, because both the St. John's and the Everglades headwaters pretty much start in Orlando. I mean, the St. John's kind of works its way down the east side of Florida, but the Kissimmee waterway, Shingle Creek, is actually the northernmost part of the Everglades, in the water that eventually empties into the Everglades. So all that to say is urban sprawl is one of those things that I can't stand. I understand completely that you can't tell somebody what they can and can't do with their own property. But first of all, Tavistock is not actually an American corporation. It's a British-owned corporation out of the Bahamas. And I'm glad that the Orange County was able to prevent the annexing of the Mormon Ranch. But eventually what's going to happen is that they're eventually going to annex the Mormon Ranch. Basically, the government of Orlando was able to squeeze like $600 million out of Orange County, the tourist fund, in order to get the tourist center, not the tourist center, the Kia Center, remodeled and improvements on that. So it does help Orlando, no doubt. It brings in revenue and all, or Orange County, but at the end of the day, they're kind of squeezing out the other improvements that can go from the tourist fund in Orange County. Other municipalities won't get the benefits that the Kia Center puts out because or that the money was put into for the tourist fund. But yeah, that's urban sprawl is Orlando is in this unique opportunity as opposed to a lot of other cities, especially in the north, where they're hemmed in by a river or a major waterway. Like Miami's, pinned between the beach and the Everglades, whereas Orlando doesn't have a major waterway until the St. John's, and it doesn't have isn't hemmed on another area until pretty much all the way to Tampa, which is the Gulf Coast. Kind of reminds me of the layout of what Fort Worth and Dallas became, with Arlington in the middle, and that's basically what Orlando's going to become. Central Florida is Tampa, Lakeland, and then Orlando. Growing up into like one mega city, and I'd rather it spread to the west, to be honest, along the I-4 corridor to the southwest. It's less volatile land. It is farmland, but it's not a vital waterway. There's not major waterways besides the aquifer, of course, and that brings its own issues. But if Orlando has to grow, I'd rather it grow to the west, not the east, for sure. So yeah, there's that problem, and really Orlando needs to start growing up instead of out. Excuse me. It needs to start, if it wants to grow, it needs to start building its downtown infrastructure into a proper downtown infrastructure. Orlando's just so spread out because it's a suburban nightmare. It's cookie cutter homes for as far as the eye can see, and that's what happens when you develop large plots of land at once instead of other cities do that. I mean, of course, but if you're living in the city, in like New York City, let's say, everybody that lives in New York City lives in a high-rise condo of some kind, 5-10 story condo, unless you live in Queens or Long Island or anything. If you live in Manhattan, you live in a high-rise condo, and that's what Orlando should end up doing if it wants to grow population-wise, and it needs to, because it's going to end up affecting the waterways, the St. John's waterways specifically, and that will, if timeshares and all that, and rentals, and people who snowbirds that come down for the winter or whatever, that would be the place for them. High-rise condo, they don't have to take care of anything. They don't have to put a ton of phosphates in the ground and fertilize and basically artificially keep their lawns green while they're up north. But yeah, so like I said, though, there's one thing I don't want to do. I don't want to tell people what they can and can't do with their property. But at the end of the day, I don't want the urban sprawl to happen and destroy the St. John's, the conservation areas, especially that we have on the east coast of Orange County and Seminole, and all the way up north and south, and Osceola and Volusia. They're small town. If Mormon Ranch has to be built up, they should build it into like an area like Christmas or Kenansville kind of thing, where you have 2, 3, 5 acre lots, and with livestock or whatever, and that would be a much more appealing way to grow out, in my opinion. However, again, I'm not going to tell them what they can and can't do, but that's just my humble opinion. So I will continue on with the next topic in just a second. So my next topic is actually going to be on another environmental issue that I'm sure everybody has been hearing about, and I will only touch on it briefly because there's a ton of speculation. There's a ton of let's see, accusations being flung from both Democrats and Republicans. One may be right, one may be wrong. I'm not going to judge that for right now. What I am going to say though is that a lot of it could be prevented. I mean, fires are a natural part of an ecosystem is kind of resetting itself. We have them in Florida, but we do a lot of controlled burns, and that prevents a lot of the buildup that makes a fire that go out of control. If you go to any conservation area, wildlife of refuge or WMA, like I do, I love to go hunting. A lot of the hunting areas, they'll do these controlled burns over a few hundred acres at a time, and that prevents this foliage from building up. And we don't have we're lucky in Florida compared to California because we get a lot of rain, but there's been quite a few years I remember through my childhood and whatever that there was a drought year, and it actually happens around this time, into from winter into early spring, when the sea breeze hasn't been able to pop up as every day like it does during the summer. We can get these fires that kind of burn out of control, but if controlled burns help prevent that. There actually is another factor that goes into this, and it's the kind of trees that they have out in California. So there's actually a form of eucalyptus tree, if I remember right, that they have out there that was imported in over 100 years ago now, when California was up and coming. They imported it from Australia, I believe, and what ends up happening is this eucalyptus tree, this specific species, only flowers or germinates and spreads its seed when there's a fire. So what ends up doing is, the way God designed it is that when there's a fire, destroys all the foliage and takes out a lot of the competition. These trees will spawn their seeds and plant new trees, but the eucalyptus tree has a lot of oil, which allows it to burn, so it causes fires, which allows it to spread, which causes fires again. So unless you can manage the underfoliage that this one tree produces with controlled burns and such, you actually need to do this, or you end up with what happened with these wildfires. There's talked about specific species of fish, and Donald Trump has been talking about it for a couple years now, or pretty much every time there's a fire in California, there's a fish, there's something there. Basically, there's something that you could do. It's not a surprise when there's a fire in California, but how you react to it or how you prepare for it is one thing. I will say that culturally, the fire department seems to have a lot of problems in LA. They focus on their LGBTQ plus whatever crap, and let me tell you, look, I'm not saying that they can't do their job. However, if that you even hint at that being a focus of your department when it has nothing to do with fighting a fire, somebody's gender, sexuality has nothing to do with fighting a fire. So, in theory, it should be okay. But what ends up happening is that they end up focusing on this, and they divert resources, little, however it may be. They end up, a leader's focus should be the mission. If there's diversion away from that, you end up with, well, frankly, what you got now. And my goal is not to be Jonah here. It is in a way. I want California to come out of their their mindset that they have, their liberal, ungodly mindset that affects the entire country through Hollywood and politics and through the economy, because California is what 10% of the entire U.S. economy, something like that, and 10% of the population. I think it's actually more economically even, but I want them to come out of their out of their wickedness, and casting judgment on them. Oh, see, this is God's judgment. See, you okay, maybe if it's God's judgment, let it be. But if it's not, that's not really my place to judge whether it's God's judgment or not. The call is to come forth out of judgment, whether it is or not. That's just the way things work. Because who am I to know the plans of God in daily life like that? I will continue on in the next segment. So the last topic I want to cover is, and big in the news, is the President Trump's interest and possible threat of acquiring Greenland. So Greenland has actually been strategically important to the U.S. for quite a while. In fact, we've tried to purchase it like 4 separate times. Seward, the guy that the Secretary of State that during the Johnson administration in the 1867 acquired Alaska. He also attempted to acquire Greenland too, and that was turned down. Rockefeller attempted to purchase the island for the U.S. That was turned down, and the last time it was before Trump that it was attempted was post World War II. Greenland actually was occupied during the U.S. During World War II by the U.S. Excuse me. It actually we established Air Force bases on it, and it actually was a great help in minimizing something called the Mid-Atlantic Gap, or the Black Pit. This is the area between back before jet fighters and transatlantic flights were very easy. The range of a lot of fighters and spotter planes were not, they couldn't span the entire Atlantic, right? So when a convoy would take off from the U.S. To Great Britain with supplies and troops and whatnot, there was a 1,000-mile gap in the Atlantic where that was called the Black Pit, because that's where the German submarines would sit and wait for a convoy to float by and be able to take them out. Spotter planes were immensely important in radioing and communicating with convoys and naval crews on the location, because if you were to look, submarines can't go down infinitely. In fact, submarines back then, were only submerged, at most 50 meters. So you could see, you could possibly, see the trail, from the propeller and whatnot, of a submarine, and a spotter plane would communicate with the destroyers and help direct the convoy away from these hunter-killer groups, the wolf packs as they were called. So the air bases on Greenland helped the U.S. close that gap and minimize casualties and losses. And so when Denmark fell to the Nazis and were occupied, that's when the U.S. took it over. And in fact, we offered to buy it after World War II, because the new geographical threat was the Soviet Union. And if you know anything about the Soviet Union, they have very few warm weather ports that aren't encased. In fact, they have none that aren't encased. They have Vladivostok on the east coast, which is far away from the any other population centers of the Soviet Union, or now Russia. It's close to China and all that, but not to any of their major population centers. And that's really close to Alaska, so the U.S. is kind of close there. And on the other side, on the western side of Russia, they have the Black Sea, but the Black Sea is encased in the Bosphorus Strait by Turkey, and then they have St. Petersburg, which is heavily guarded by the Baltics and stuff like that. So they have very little. In fact, ironically, Greenland has them pretty tightened down there too. The only other place is Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. I forget how to say that exactly. Those are on the north ports, but those are often frozen during the winter. However, those are vital submarine bases for Russia to get to open water and to harass and get close to the U.S. That would be their ports. That would be they wouldn't be easily spotted, and they would come down through between Iceland, Greenland, and the UK into that gap. And if the U.S. was to acquire Greenland, it will help close that gap. Not only that, but it would also help as a forward base against, basically put the U.S. troops closer to a Russian population center, U.S. territory to a Russian population center, if that came down to it. 80% of Russians live west of the Urals. So if there was to be an attack, that would be an area for like a forward staging area for long range missiles and whatnot, and also an area where you possibly could intercept missiles incoming from from over the polar cap and Arctic area. Anyways, so there's that. Also, it has quite a few strategic resources that are underutilized because of the way Greenland and the EU's policy is about conservation policies. They hinder the use of these strategic resources that are, frankly, they're going to be big in battery making and whatnot. I said 24 of the 30 raw minerals that are needed are found in Greenland, something to that effect. But we'll see. I'm not pro annexing it by force by any means. I would definitely prefer to purchase it. However, the U.S. has its own budgetary problems. But if this ends up being a strategic acquisition that allows the U.S. to grow its economy at a fast pace, it could be worth it. Who knows? How over leveraged the U.S. economy is with governmental debt is insane. So there's that. So between strategic resources, close to enemies, and the weakness of Denmark really is a huge problem too for Greenland itself. They're very underutilized. There's only 40,000 people living in Greenland anyways. They do have a largely autonomous state. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the policy that it is. It's like the Rigskap or whatever policy. But yeah, I'm interested to see how that goes. Denmark has said they're opposed. Greenland says they're opposed, but are willing to talk to Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr. So we'll see how it goes in the coming weeks. Other than that, that's all I have today for this week. Until next time, see you. If you'd like to see some graphics and other stuff that I have for this episode, you can follow me on X at GapFillers1776. Thank you.